Ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, good evening. I am Greg Skenik, Vermont Managing Editor for New England newspapers. That would be the Manchester Journal, the Bennington Banner, and the Brattleboro Reformer. And it is my honor to welcome all of you to this forum discussion on school safety, gun violence, and solutions for our community and our state. First, I want to take time to introduce the panelists who have graciously given their time to be with us this evening. First, from the state of Vermont, we have with us Education Secretary Rebecca Holcomb, Public Safety Commissioner Tom Anderson, Mental Health Commissioner Melissa Bailey. We are honored by their presence and by the time that they've taken to be with us, traveling down from Montpelier. Thank you very much for being with us today. We're also pleased to have with us State Senator Dick Sears of Bennington, from the Vermont State Police, the Detective Lieutenant Reg Treya, who commands the detective unit for Bennington County, and Sheriff Shasbury Barracks Commander Lieutenant Thomas Moser. Here I should mention that we did invite Bennington Police Chief Paul Doucette to attend. Chief Doucette planned to attend and very much looked forward to being here. Unfortunately, he's unable to be here, and so I want to thank him here in public for his willingness to participate. And to continue our introductions, we also have with us Lorna Matern, the Executive Director of United Counseling Services here in Bennington. And I'll call to the stage students who will help us focus our discussion to start the discussion for the evening by talking about this issue as they have faced it in their young lives. From Burr and Burton Academy, Tyler Jager and Katie Lyle, and from Long Trail School, Griffin Gordon. If you guys want to come up and have a seat. I'd also like to point out here that we did reach out to Arlington Memorial High School and Mount Anthony Union High School for students to be part of this panel. Our efforts weren't successful. If there's kids from those schools who want to participate by asking questions, if you're in the audience, please feel free. Now then, just to introduce what we're here to talk about. It was about a month ago when a young man from Pulteney was arrested for allegedly planning to commit a shooting at Fairhaven High School. Not more than a week after the Parkland shooting in Florida. And our governor, Phil Scott, said that we needed to have a conversation about some of these issues with regards to school safety, to mental health issues, to gun laws. And he in his remarks, he did point out that could be a difficult conversation because there are points of view that are divergent on gun laws. But he called on us to have that necessary but difficult but necessary conversation. And as newspapers, we thought, this is a good opportunity for us to help promote that conversation and help that conversation happen locally. So now, just a moment that let me just get on now to our student panelists. So just to let you know how this is going to work. Time is short, and we're running a little late already because of our parking situation. So I want to ask everyone to be brief and to be respectful in taking time to speak. Respect each other and each other's opinions, please. We'll be taking my assistant Jen Smith from the Berkshire Eagle is here from New England newspapers. She's going to be, if you want to ask a question, raise your hand and she'll come around with question cards. So we'll be taking questions in that format in order to keep the discussion moving as we go. We'll also have opportunities where we have a wireless microphone and she can come around and have folks actually ask questions directly. Maybe we'll do that after each mini session. Because we have so many panelists, we're going to try to break this down into smaller sessions. We'll start with with our folks from Montpelier, since they travel the longest distance, and have them start with the state response and sort of where the administration's at on these issues, and then we'll segue into more of the local response and what local educators and counselors are doing to deal with some of these issues. So let's start with our students then. Guys, thank you so much for being here. If you would just kind of start by talking to me a little bit about how school shootings have affected you in your young lives. I mean, having seen them covered on television, and then more recently, the situation in Parkland and the way that students there have gotten involved and really taken the lead. Anyone who wants to? Tyler.
I guess I'll start us off. So Columbine was in 1999, I believe. I was born in 2000, so I haven't gone a year of my life without living in the age of school shootings. I essentially, I think that I can say that for all of us. Essentially, we grew up with it. I can remember really clearly in 2012, I believe, exactly where I was when I heard about the Sandy Hook shooting, and it really affected me. I was with my friends, and it was. I really don't know a lot of adult students who didn't shed some tears that weekend or in the coming days. And then after Parkland happened, just a month ago, I think now, it really hit hard how easily it could happen anywhere. Despite everything that we've done for safety, and it's almost like the fear of not being safe rather than the chances of such an event happening are so slim. But I don't know a single student at our school who has not considered it at our school occurring, a school shooting. Every conversation we've ever had, I think Katie will attest to the same, have ended with that, like they've pictured it. And I wrote a letter to the editor in the Manchester Journal about this because the lack of action over the past 19 years of this issue have made me very angry that nothing's been done to stop this from happening. And after Sandy Hook, essentially no laws were passed by Congress to prevent gun violence, and I really hope that we can change that after Parkland. I'm really happy with the students being brave enough to take the stand on the issue, to take that moral authority, and I want to be part of that.
Thank you, Tyler. Katie?
Yeah, and as Tyler has said, school shootings seem to be something that has just kind of grotesquely unified our generation, because generations prior have things like, oh, where were you when the Challenger exploded? Where were you when you first heard about 9/11? But the first big landmark event like that for our generation was Sandy Hook. I remember I was homesick from school in the 7th grade, and all of a sudden I was just on my computer looking at the news, and I just got one alert, and I just kept going deeper and deeper, and I couldn't believe what was happening, because this was the first time that I had experienced something so horrific that felt so close to home. Because I grew up in Connecticut, and many of my friends knew kids that were killed that day. They babysat for them. They were their neighbors. They went to church together. And it just felt so real and so close to home. And since then, there have been so many more mass shootings. And it's not like these are things that are completely unpreventable. There are steps that can be taken and steps that must be taken for these sorts of events to be prevented in the future. And that sort of desensitization that has happened in this age of mass shootings has kind of really come to the front of everybody's mind recently, as we realize that these things keep happening and we haven't really done anything as a country to prevent them on a mass scale. And that needs to change, because we need to make sure that this won't happen ever again.
Thank you, Katie. Griffin. Yeah, okay.
So I go to Long Trail School. It's a really small school. We've got about 180 or 190 students. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about the practical effects of these shootings on our day-to-day lives. I've always grown up with lockdown drills and things like that in the case of someone actually coming into a school with malicious intent. And that was so normal to me growing up, and now that I look back upon it, it's actually a little bit horrifying that kids in first grade are being taught that they should know how to act when someone comes in to their school with the intent of ending their lives. So when I see that we have these kinds of drills and they're so normal, and when we have them that people will actually goof off when it is legitimately a matter of life or death, it's a little bit troubling, and I think that a lot of people would agree with me on that if they really took a moment to think about it. Another thing that I've noticed is that a lot of people do talk about it, but we don't talk about it every day. There are people in my school who have cousins, family members who have been killed in various shootings around the country. And this really came out during the walkout, which was about a week ago. And I heard a great speech from a young lady in 8th grade whose cousin had been killed in a shooting, and it really was just astounding to me to see that while it is something we see on the news all the time, we've all grown so desensitized to it, but these are people. Like, we're not invincible, and we are living these lives in these places that could become targets. So it's a little bit unnerving to see that there is very little action being taken. And I think that these sort of forums are a good place to start.
Thank you, all of you. If I can follow up with one follow-up question for all three of you. You talked a lot about fear. Statistically speaking, I mean, these events are blessedly rare. And, you know, we are talking about follow-up to Fairhaven because it was a non-event rather than an event. But still, you know, it was a serious threat. When you think about this, do you sort of think about the fear versus reality, and what does that feel like for someone who's 17 or 18 years old to be having that sort of to be mulling that over in your mind, and in the way that it sort of affects your day to day?
Well, it's definitely stressful, and it is the knowledge that, you know, if the country continues on the course that it has since Sandy Hook, it's likely that I will not die in a mass shooting statistically, but somebody will, and some American will, if no action is taken. It's not going to solve itself. So it's almost, that fear for me is stronger because I know that is very likely. I know that personally, it's not likely that my life will be taken, but it could be me. And it probably would be someone if no action happens.
Yeah, exactly. Like, of course, there's a balance between probability and what we think about, but the fact that it still is happening, and the fact that it's something that we do think about, and that it's something that we have to think about in order to kind of consciously feel safe or safer, is startling. And I feel like it does affect the day-to-day lives of students, even though it's so improbable and it's never going to happen to the vast majority of us. But like Tyler said, it's going to happen to someone. It's going to happen to some of us, and even just those few people that are in whatever the next school shooting or mass shooting may be, even those few people's lives are worth doing something, even if it's not you specifically.
Yeah, and another thing to think about is that while it is fairly rare that kids are dying in these mass shootings, it is happening. People don't expect their houses to burn down, but they get insurance. And in our case, we don't expect to die in a mass shooting, or at least I don't. But I would like some insurance that I don't have to worry so much about it happening.
Thank you. Just one more quick question for all three of you. We have officials from, we have a legislator in the House, State Senator Dick Sears. We have 3 commissioners from state government here. What would you like to see Vermont do in terms of addressing this sort of multifaceted issue? You know, I mean, there's lots of parts to it. I mean, certainly firearms are part of it. Mental health is part of it. What we do to keep schools safe is part of it. Thoughts about that? If you want to go in the same order, feel free. Or if you want to.
Well, Vermont is in a very unique position as a state because politically it is a very liberal state, but it does have relatively lax gun laws compared to many other liberal states. In my opinion, I think what Vermont needs to do is set an example for those states that have lax gun laws by instituting a ban on semi-automatic rifles, on high-capacity magazines, a 10-day waiting period, background checks on private gun sales. All of these have been on the floor of the Vermont General Assembly, and those are the policies I want to see to that extent.
Yeah, one thing I definitely wish to see, in not just the Vermont state government, but in all levels of government nationally, is compromise. This is naturally a very polarizing issue because it is so emotional and it is so rooted in each person's individual nuanced kind of set of a moral compass regarding this specific issue. But one thing that needs to happen is that both sides and any sort of opinion present in these levels of government needs to be recognized and to recognize each other. I was able to have the opportunity to visit the Vermont State Senate a few weeks ago when they were first discussing the S-55 bill, which added, as Tyler said earlier, I believe it was the expansion of background checks from just sales in federally licensed gun dealerships to the gun show loophole, and also, which many people call it, and also the kind of sort of gun inheritance or private sales, gun inheritance between family or private sales between friends or even just strangers you meet on the internet in a Five Guys parking lot, as happened in South Burlington, to buy an an AR-15, sorry. And what I believe needs, when I went to visit the Senate at that time, a large part of the debate that I witnessed, of course, I have to recognize that was just a few hours, and it's an incredibly small portion of the debate that has actually happened on this issue in the Senate, and I'm not privy to every single speech that happened. But when I was there, a large portion of what went on was just saying your opinion. Not really, it wasn't a lot of response towards the opinions of others and the specific policy that has been put forth by other members of the Senate, but it was rather, I believe this, and then and even sometimes they just went on this long rambling story that didn't really have much to do with the issue at hand, rather than just trying to get some people to your sides by giving a really long-winded speech. And I believe that we need to make sure that this is an issue that is dealt with quickly, and this is an issue that is dealt with all of the opinions of all members of all sides dealt with in mind.
Yeah, I'd also like to see some of the things that Tyler was talking about at the beginning. I think there should be a stronger focus on mental health as well. It is largely a mental health problem as well as a gun problem, as well as several other things. I think there should be easier access to mental health care. I think that we should have systems in place to support kids who are going through tough times, who may be having some sort of breakdown, who may be seeing, guns, all these shootings on TV and thinking, well, that guy's on the news now. Maybe I can get there. I think we really need to be not so much focusing on guns, but on the people.
Do you think we in the news media mess that up by the way we focus on that?
I wouldn't say it's anyone's fault particularly. It seems that it's just a general trend of the people to shy away from mental health issues. And when you have something as big and polarizing as guns, it can be really easy to sit there and go, well, here's the problem, let's focus on that. But it's really a hugely multifaceted issue. If we look at guns, mental health, school security, and other things like that, specifically guns in the home and the culture around them, it's a huge problem, and it's a huge mess of these problems intertwining. So if we can look at certain issues and start to unravel that mess, then we can start to actually make a lot of progress.
Okay, I have one more question, one of our first instant question. Just a really quick answer. How do you feel about arming teachers?
It is one of the most idiotic ideas I've ever heard.
To kind of expand upon that, teachers are meant to teach, and they shouldn't have to worry about protecting the lives of their students. There should be other people like police officers that have been stationed at schools in some districts, and depending on the specifics of each school situation, there should be people that are specifically meant to protect the school, not trying to greaten the already heavy load carried by all these teachers in schools by making sure that they have just one more thing to worry about, as having a gun in the classroom at all times, and worrying about what could happen if one of their students gets a hold of it, or any other teachers wondering about what the actions of another teacher could be if they suddenly have guns on school property and in classrooms.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like a great idea to stop school shootings by putting more guns in schools.
Right.
If there are more guns, there's going to be more shots fired. If you don't have people who are properly trained to respond to these sort of high-stress situations, there could be a shaky hand here and an unwanted death there. It seems to be an escalation of force that is completely unnecessary.
All right, thank you. If you guys would feel free to take a seat in the front row, and if you have other questions, please feel free to ask them when we as we go on. Thank you very much for your attention. Now I'd like to call to the stage your state government, Commissioner Secretary Holcomb, Commissioner Anderson, and Commissioner Bailey. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the bar has been set.
I think we're done, right? We can just go home now?
No, it's not quite that easy. Actually, just kind of building off one of the cards I have here is there was a lot said about fear and about sort of the way that when these things happen. I mean, they're statistically we have to sort of, it's kind of like a plane crash where I never wrote about the plane that landed, safely without incident, but the one that came in, with an engine missing was, that had to run the Logan. So with that in mind, if the three of you could just sort of talk briefly about your role in state government in reacting to the governor's request following the Parkland shooting and the Fairhaven plot about assessing security in schools, assessing safety, assessing our mental health treatment capabilities. Whoever wants to go first, please feel free.
So I will kick it off. I'm Tom Anderson. I'm the Commissioner of Public Safety. My background is a federal prosecutor for most of my career. I was U.S. Attorney in Vermont under President Bush. I want to thank the students, first of all, for coming out. I want to thank everybody here for coming out. I want to thank the newspapers for putting this on. So I think it's a great opportunity to have this conversation. So it's a conversation I think Vermont should have. It's a conversation that we're having. It's happening across the state, but it's a conversation. It's not yelling at each other. These are issues that are extremely important to discuss in a civil level across the state of Vermont. So I did want to recognize the students because, some things you said, like, you guys are the future. Where are you? Where'd you go?
We're over here.
Okay. So keep the passion you have right now. My generation is going to fade away. And it's going to be up to you to continue this discussion and not just come out on one night. That's an easy thing to do. It's doing it day in and day out and becoming involved in politics and becoming involved in public policy and using the passion you have right now to do that. So I did want to talk a little bit, just a couple of the areas that I'd like to talk about are, what we're doing, how DPS is collaborating with the Department of Education, and what we're doing to keep Vermont schools safe. Then I'd like to talk a little bit about what the governor has proposed with respect to assessing school safety, and then talk a little bit about what the Vermont State Police does to ensure that the schools are safe, because they fall under the Department of Public Safety. So those are the state troopers. Several of them are here tonight. So it's important to know that this is not new. School safety is something we have been doing since 1999. That is when the Department of Public Safety and the Department of Education began to collaborate on keeping Vermont schools safe. So it's not a new concept, and it would be a mistake for people to walk out thinking, with the Parkland shooting, that this was something we just decided to to put on our plate and start working on. This is something that has been going on for almost 20 years now. It's not a static process. This is a dynamic process. So we change when we learn things, we try to adapt, and each one of these incidents changes things. So this is a dynamic process that we go through throughout the years to make sure our schools are safe. School safety is not limited to just shootings. So we train on all hazards, and that can range from active shootings to fires to bus accidents to flooding. So when you think about school safety, it's a mistake just to think all we're doing is talking about school active shooters. We are talking about all areas, all hazards that affect our schools. In 2016, just to give you an idea of why this is a dynamic process, we created the School Safety Center, and that was formed to boost our ability to keep schools safe. And they identified, so the School Safety Center, and if you haven't, I would encourage you to go look at the website. It provides a tremendous amount of resources. You can just Google it. A tremendous amount of resources for educators, for parents, for community members on what's being done in the arena of school safety and what community members can do to ensure their schools are safe. So I would encourage you to do that. What do they do? So what do we do at the state level? The School Safety Center tries to work with local communities to encourage school districts to have specific emergency operation plans, which sets forth essential things. Are you planning? Are you preparing? Are you mitigating? How are you responding? And how are you recovering from emergencies or disasters that might affect your school? Being prepared means knowing what hazards you're at risk for, creating a plan to address those hazards, training on that plan, and testing the effectiveness of those plans. One of the strongest recommendations the School Safety Center makes is that supervisory unions coordinate local public safety team meetings to discuss and develop emergency plans that best fit their communities. This is not a top-down Montpelier saying, do this and do it this way. What the School Safety Center does is encourages that to be at the local level. Let me repeat that. It is the strongest recommendation that happen at the local level, that you know your plans and you have your plans. And if I was a parent in Bennington, that's what I'd be asking. What are we doing in that regard? Do we have a plan? Do we have a local public safety team that looks at this and addresses this issue? In September 2017, Governor Scott declared that month School Safety Awareness Month. And he emphasized that very thing, the importance of school districts to plan and to train for emergencies on how to test those plans through exercises. We also yearly have a school safety conference, for those that don't know that. But every year we have a school safety conference that is put on around the state that addresses issues. This last year we focused on personal and organizational resiliency after a critical incident. It was attended by, you can tell me how many, but
About 350 people.
so that was schools from around the state that came out and did that. So
Yeah, and I think the thing to know about that is it's not just school staff who come, but they come in teams that represent first responders and school staff from regions. So it's really an all first responder event as well.
So that's sort of what we're doing at the School Safety Center level to make sure that we have plans in place and are utilizing the School Safety Center to support local communities to develop the plans that every school should have at this point. Again, this has been going on now for 20 years or coming up on 20 years, and that is an area that each school has responsibility for. So, as you know, on February 22nd, the governor issued a memorandum with a bunch of recommendations as to how to address the Fairhaven thing. We both observed it. It caused the governor to change his thinking on some of these issues, and particularly, could we be doing things better? Are there areas that we could look at that would ensure school safety? I think he said at his press conference, kids ought to be able to go to school. And it ought to be safe for them to go to school. So he did come out with a number of proposals during in that memo and during that press conference. And one of them, three things specifically with respect to school safety, was a school safety assessment to be done at every single school within the state of Vermont. He also proposed that there be school safety grants, that the legislature appropriate some money for school safety grants. And number three, that there be an outreach by media to try to enlist the media to assist in public service announcements that really address this issue. The see something, say something. And if you look at Fairhaven, that's exactly what happened. And also, to again emphasize the resources that are available at the school safety website, which is, I do have the address, schoolsafety.vermont.gov, for those interested. So on the school assessments, what are we doing? They're being conducted as we speak. So between February 22nd, state troopers, local police departments, sheriff's offices, they could not agree to help out fast enough. And they are going around to each schools within their respective jurisdictions and doing these safety assessments for each school. So they're meeting with people at the school that are knowledgeable on what their plan is, what they're doing, and we're trying to do this assessment to see where our gaps are, with the idea that there'll be a recommendation of the governor, hopefully by mid-April. So it's happening very, very quickly as to where our gaps are and what we can do to address those. So that's going to be completed at the end of the month. That's no easy task. Police officers got to go out to every single school, and I think there are over 300 and something that they've got to go out to and do safety assessments on. And they all each take about 45 minutes to do. I think one of the hopes of the governor is that once we have these assessments and we can then make some reasoned judgments about what needs to be done at some of the schools, that the grant proposal can then kick in, where we would then have grant money available to schools for upgrades of existing security measures that might be in place there. And that could include video monitoring surveillance that might need updating, intercom systems, window coverings, exterior and interior door locks, and perimeter security measures. The second prong of the grant is that it's identified that schools need new equipment, not just upgrades, but new equipment in those same areas, that grants would be available to do that. And the governor's asked for an appropriation of, I think, between $3 and $5 million for that grant purpose. So that's what's going on with respect to the governor's initiatives that came out in late February, as far as what we're doing in the school safety arena. Finally, I'd just like to talk to you just briefly about what the state police is doing and does every single day with respect to school safety. Every single barracks commander, I've got 10 barracks around the state of Vermont. Every single barracks commander goes to an all hazards management and a unified command training at Texas A&M University in Texas. That training, it's an intensive training. It's computer driven. It gives them incident management skills to deal with exactly these types of hazards, not only school shootings, but other types of hazards that would require incident command training. All troopers, so that's the leaders of the barracks have that specialized training. All troopers have basic training in the incident command structure, so that they know how to react if something like this happens, and they're properly trained for these types of incidents. So that every single trooper that goes through the academy and wears the green and gold goes through that training. They know how to efficiently and rapidly move through a building and to search for a suspect and to search it effectively and safely. Barracks commanders and troopers, an expectation of mine, and I know it's an expectation of Colonel Birmingham's, is that they will build relationships with the school staff in their respective jurisdictions. So that has been a directive from both me and the colonel, that the barracks commanders and the senior staff at the barracks will build those relationships. So they know the people. They know the people at the schools. They know what's going on in the schools. They know what the plans are, and they have those plans. Copies of those plans are at every barracks. So if something, God forbid, something does happen in one of the schools, they know where the rooms are. They know the layout of the school. They know where they're going when something like that happens. Troopers they do walkthroughs, safety walkthroughs at the schools. They attend emergency drills. They provide feedback. So that's some of the things that the state police are doing. That every single day throughout the state to ensure school safety. So I think I turn it over to the Secretary of Education. Again, this is a partnership. There's a reason you see public safety, education, and mental health on this stage. because we all have a part in this, and we all play critical parts in this collaboration, in this partnership.
If I can interrupt just for a moment, I have a couple of instant questions from the audience for you, Mr. Commissioner. If you could just briefly, just really tell me what these assessments consist of. If you could elaborate just a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So the assessment is it was developed by the School Safety Center with the input of the Department of Education. So it is probably a survey of maybe 30 or 40 questions that goes through both external security, it goes through the security at the schools, what they've got, what they don't have. Some of it identifies by the school personnel what they need. Some of it deals with what does your emergency plan look like? When was the last time you updated it? So it's things of that nature to ensure that the actual hardening of the school, what that looks like, what's the protection of the school, and then what are they doing in the area of planning to ensure that they have the appropriate plans in place.
Okay, and second question.
Can I just add to that? And I think people need to understand that we have model school safety plans that have been developed quite carefully that are the standard for schools. There's some local variation, depending on local circumstances, but the survey is key to best practice as institutionalized in those plans.
Right.
So if a system has a robust plan in place, it's a quick audit or inventory of the elements of those plans.
And one secondary question, actually, I think maybe all of you could answer really quickly, because this is very thoughtful. With the popularity of social media among young and older students, bullying is a serious issue in our elementary and middle schools. What role do you, because we're talking about school security, not only shootings, but other safety issues and health and safety issues in schools. What role do you feel the teasing, harassment, or that kind of cruelty among students might play in the kind of stress that might lead to a school shooting or some other occurrence? If all three of you could just answer that really, really briefly.
I might ask the students that question. Obviously social media is not something I grew up with. I mean, it's obviously a tremendous component of every student now that is in school. I think it has probably, I'm sure it has exacerbated the bullying issue. It's bullying in a different way. And I think some of I think it's important for students to understand, the effect social media can have on their fellow students. Mm-hmm. And, that is part of the issue, I think, in this conversation, is how we deal with that and how students deal with that within their schools and in their own sort of, what they're doing, so.
Sure. Commissioner Bailey, thought about that?
I've got.
Or Rebecca?
Well, I can do it too. I mean,
Commissioner Holmes, excuse me.
it's I think we need to keep in mind that there are, bullying is a very serious issue, and I know the agency has a number of initiatives to really teach proactively positive social and emotional skills and to manage bullying. We have a very strong state policy on hazing, harassment, and bullying that we expect and we investigate when we hear reports. We do report data on bullying by system. We can't do it at the school level because it's the incidence is so low that it can't be reported in most cases without revealing personally identifiable information. But and so I don't want to minimize that as an issue, but we also need to be clear that many of the perpetrators of some of the events that we've talked about are not people who've bullied or been bullied.
Right.
So it's not a silver bullet. This is a very complicated issue that needs a complicated and multi-front response. In the same way, we shouldn't make the mistake of thinking that there is a mental health solution to what we're seeing, because most people with mental health issues would never ever pick up a gun and fire it at another human. So we need to just be really careful about how we bound the conversation. Oh, sorry, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Okay. If you want to have more to add on that.
Right, I honestly really don't. I mean, Secretary Holcomb said it very well.
Okay. Secretary Holcomb, if you could sort
Sure.
of follow
Well,
Commissioner Anderson's
Tom and
lead.
I arm wrestled before the event, so he got to do most of the fun stuff on school safety for
Okay.
everybody, but I do want to just
tell me
underscore
about
a couple things, and I'll talk about some of the things that he didn't address. First of all, I want to reiterate that this is a long-standing initiative that we've had in common. I remember being a principal 20 years ago and being visited by the state trooper in my area, who I already knew quite well because he let me into my car at the beginning of every year after I locked myself out before the first day of school. But we have had this initiative in place, and I remember developing those safety plans, and the safety plans that we have now are nothing like the ones that we had 20 years ago, in part because of the reciprocal relationship that we've had between the Department of Education at that time, now the Agency of Education, and the Department of Public Safety. We have learned as we've gone, we've learned from our systems, we've learned by bringing in outside expertise and getting better at what we do. And so I'm really proud to be part of that work, and I know I can answer one of your questions because I know Superintendent Colquhoun is in the front. I know our public safety liaison was here in Bennington, met with your leadership team and reviewed all your plans just this past August. So this is work that is in process. I wanted to just go back and acknowledge the students again too, because I think we really need to hear what they're saying. And I'm just going to share, Tyler, you talked about your life being framed by Columbine and Parkland. That's an incredibly powerful thing to say right there. Kate, or is it Katie? Kate, I think it is. You're telling us not to let it happen again, not to become desensitized. And I hear that as I go around the state. I hear people saying, let's refuse to accept a world in which schools are places where people are afraid. Because I can tell you our schools are actually quite safe relative to so many of the places our kids are in their daily lives. And we can't accept that school is a place where kids don't feel safe. And Griff, you spoke about, and I thought it was such an insightful comment. You talked about how, and the reality is gun violence has been with us forever, and it's been in some communities, and it isn't something we've all experienced, even though it is part of American life and has been for years. But you talked about this transition from thinking of shooting as something that happened to other people to shooting being something that really came home and you realized was a possibility for any person. And I think that's what's different, is that we've gotten to a place where we realize that the scale of some of the incidents that we've seen has made what may have been a reality for some communities for years now a reality for all of us in ways that we really can't turn our head. And I think that's a really powerful way to start this conversation, to emphasize what Commissioner Anderson said. This is a conversation. We need to hold on to that vision that you've put for us and that challenge as adults, and acknowledge your anger and think about what we can do to put our heads together to try to make this a world where your children don't have that same experience, and that really is our charge. And I want to congratulate you for your unwillingness to accept that part of your condition is fear. We should not accept that. We can't accept that, particularly because in our state we know that for so many of our children, schools are actually the safest place in their lives, and we need to protect that for them. I also know as an educator, I don't know another educator who hasn't thought about Columbine or Sandy Hook as they do those drills as well, because it is part of what we do. But so I really want to start by just suggesting that we have two issues here. One is gun violence, and we need to have that conversation, and another is school safety, and they're not the same. They overlap, but they are not the same. And I hope we can keep that in mind. Each of these events and any incident of gun violence, and most gun violence in Vermont, I think it's the second leading cause, or it's the second leading cause of death for kids who are 15 to 22 in the state of Vermont. But 92% of those gun deaths are actually death by suicide. So guns are a part of our community. They do take lives, and we need to think about how that plays out. However it happens, any kind of loss of life is a tragedy, and it has profound effects on the community where it happens. And to go back to something that Commissioner Anderson said, we have to take an all hazards approach. We can't just focus on guns, because many of the things that rip young people from our midst are motor vehicle accidents, other accidents that make us have to respond not just to the immediate incident, but also to the trauma that it might affect have on the kids in our care. So when we think about responding to school safety, we have to think about how we support our administrators and our educators in responding to any kind of event that might hurt or create trauma for the kids in our care. Because our first and foremost responsibility is to take care of other people's children, and we have to do everything we can to keep them safe. And there are really, I would say, two elements and three basic phases to this. The first is we really need to focus on social emotional interventions. What is it we do that help make sure that our kids are feeling, first of all, like they belong, and they have that sense of belonging and well-being, so that they feel safe and they feel supported. And if they're feeling threatened or feel a risk, they can report. They can let us know in ways that we can intervene constructively to help them feel safe. And then second, what is it that we can do to ensure that in the unlikely but terrifying event that something did happen, whether it's an overturned tanker on the highway next to our school or a threat of a shooter, we have a plan in place to be responsive and reactive in ways that take the best possible care. We can take care of your children. And we need to think both in terms of prevention, how we manage in the moment, and then what we do after an incident to heal, to help bring people back to where they need to be so that they can be strong and healthy and learning. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the preventative work that we do, leaving some of the safety issues, because I think Tom's already addressed them, but talk about some of the other work we do. And the first is we have an increasing emphasis in the state in our curriculum on social and emotional learning, and particularly primary instruction in positive social emotional skills. And we know whether it's investing in pre-K, in early care and learning, because we know that when children are in that ages 3 to 5 window, that's when they're developing the self-regulation skills that allow them to manage their own behavior, regulate their emotions. We know that foundational age is so essential. We need to make sure that any child who needs access to a place where they can learn that skill set has access to a safe, supportive early care and learning program that can help them develop it. Whether it's in a school setting where we actually have children who may not have good modeling at home, may not have learned that vocabulary for expressing needs or talking about problems and talking it out, we need to provide that frontline instruction, because if we can't provide that, we can't create a safe environment where kids feel safe taking risks and learning. So that is part of our curriculum now in ways that it might not have been 20 years ago. Commissioner Anderson also spoke briefly about what we would call behavioral risk assessments, and those are really multidisciplinary teams. They often involve folks from law enforcement, mental health clinicians, educators who work closely with children. When we see a child about whom we're concerned, to bring people together to really sit down and evaluate what is it we can do, what are the resources available, how can we put a system of supports around this child to help them be successful and thrive and be part of our community in a healthy way. I know Senator Sears, who will be up here in a minute, has been very invested in restorative practices and thinking about how we manage discipline in ways that reintegrate individuals back into their communities and teach them the skills to become back high-functioning members of those communities, so that we avoid the kind of alienation and isolation, which frankly is more characteristics of some of the perpetrators that we see in these events. Many of the individuals who, I think, I read a lot, and one of the authors I love is Malcolm Gladwell, and he said in 2015, the problem is not that there's an endless supply of deeply disturbed young men who are willing to contemplate horrible acts. It's that young men no longer need to be deeply disturbed to contemplate horrible acts. We need to ask what's changing in our culture, because many of the people who commit these acts are not people who would have a mental health diagnosis. So we need to ask, and I think you students spoke to it so eloquently, what is it about us that's become so desensitized to violence that violence is an acceptable thing to do, as opposed to throwing rocks or whatever people might have done in a previous generation. Other things we do are work on, we've invested heavily at the state level in strategies for hazing, harassment, and bullying, and responding to that. And we are also incorporating a school climate survey in our education quality reviews, which gives students in every school a chance to provide feedback on their perception of the school climate and culture, which can be used by the system for their local continuous improvement planning process. Because we believe that the student voice, the students are really, what they say about the school climate and culture is really the best measure of how well that climate is supporting the children. And that's data that our systems will have available starting next year. There are challenges still, and one of the things that we know is over the last 5 years, schools have increased spending on mental health clinicians and social workers statewide by about $18 million. That's a lot. And because they are the payers of last resort, when services aren't available in a community, schools do hire them. One of the challenges we have is that there's a finite supply of qualified mental health providers in the state. If they come into schools, it is a good thing that students have access to mental health clinicians. A challenge and a risk for the state is that they may not be available for the more general social support that we know is needed in addition to community-based treatment. The other thing we know is that if you're going to really help children who are troubled, you need to also help their families so that parents can parent their children and support them in ways that help them grow up and thrive and be constructive members of communities. We need to figure out how to make our mental health system, in partnership with schools, able to provide two-generation models of support for families so that we can do that. And these are things that I know that, and I'm sure Commissioner Bailey will speak to those as well. They're things that we've been proactive on. We've also tried to work with media. We know that school shootings share an element of contagion, a power of suggestion, and we do know there is now very strong empirical evidence that suggests that the way incidents are covered may actually elevate the risk of subsequent threats. And so we did reach out to all the media statewide this year after the Fairhaven incident to ask them to show restraint in moderation in how they talked about this, and to really think about how we talk about these events, similar to the way the media has changed how it talks about death by suicide, for example, has really had an impact on the number of copycat attempts in that space. And we've really encouraged our local media here to similarly think about how the way we talk about these events may amplify risk, and to try to join us in making sure that that's not what's happening. I think those are the primary things. I did want to just return to your closing point, Commissioner Anderson, because it is so important. We are doing the safety reviews. We know that that's a wonderful opportunity for us to stress test the systems that we have in place. The data from that survey is data that we will use at the state level to direct our subsequent school safety initiatives. We will target both professional development and investments in areas where we see need and respond to that. But we can't, at the end of the day, lose sight of the fact that what keeps communities safe and strong is community engagement. And to the extent that we each work out proactively to make sure that other members of our community belong, we work proactively to identify students who may need support and make sure that we're responsive and provide that support. And to the extent that each of us, if we see something that raises concern, we take the time to raise that issue, to report it to someone who can follow up on it. That's how we work together to identify flag risks and make sure that we're responding in ways that prevent, the kind of horror that we all seriously want to avoid. With that, I'd love to.
Can I break in again,
Yeah.
just really quickly, just to keep sort of the questions flowing in between as we can, as they work together with what you're having to say. This person asks, although we recognize that school safety is about much more than gun violence, what specific measures do you think should be put in place in Vermont schools to help stop gun violence? For example, armed deputies, metal detectors, et cetera.
So I think one of the, we have extraordinary variety in schools and in locations. And we have outlined, and we spend a lot of time reviewing local practices against what we know about best practices for school safety. The next investment for an individual community might not be the next investment for a neighboring community. So we're a little cautious about providing statewide prescriptions, because that really has to be done by local agencies working with local law enforcement to try to figure out the next best step. There is something incredibly reassuring about a school resource officer. We do know that it worked extremely well in the context of Fairhaven. We also know that it isn't a silver bullet solution either, and that's a terrible metaphor, I'm sorry, but there is no one way to make this not happen. What we are trying to do is be as diligent and vigilant as possible in ways that absolutely reduce the risk as much as possible. I think a piece of it is school safety and doing the best we can to make sure we have robust plans that aren't documents on a shelf, they're living documents. One of the things that we've done every year for the last 3 years is reach out and have local law enforcement, local first responders reach out to school staff so that those are living relationships. They know each other by first name. They know who to call in an emergency. And we have them go through and do the safety audits and the reviews. And I know the school safety liaisons visit different systems around the state to make sure that those documents are things that are part of our lives. They're living documents that we're working with, and they're not documents that we did once and we forgot about. So I think we need to maintain that vigilance, but there's no one strategy or solution that's going to work for all contexts.
Okay, let's move on to Commissioner Bailey. Thank you very much for
Thank you,
And
sure.
thank you very much, Secretary Holcomb. I appreciate it. We'll start just really quickly with a couple of questions based off of what Commissioner Holcomb had to say. If you could tell us a little bit more about behavioral risk assessments and what those are and how they work. Is that a
Well,
question
actually,
that you...
so behavior risk assessments are not something that mental health typically does.
Okay.
When we are screening for a mental health situation, we're looking for intimate risk. Is there risk right in the moment? I think this is what gets really challenging for folks, is to understand what the laws allow us to do, what's clinically appropriate, what's best practice in these situations. So we've had a couple of requests for risk assessments to be done and to inform people whether a kid can be in school or not. And our system isn't set up in a way to produce that report or to, in all honesty, be the one that says, in this moment, this person cannot be in school for, X amount of time or whatever. If it would be okay with you, I'd like to talk just a little bit about the system to give
Sure.
a little bit
I
of
think that would be helpful.
foundation before I start getting into any specifics.
Right.
Because I think that will make it easier to understand what is
The one
and
other
isn't
follow-up I have
possible.
can wait, so
Okay.
please
That
do.
that would just be helpful. So the Department of Mental Health oversees 10 community mental health centers. United Counseling Services is the one in the Bennington region. And those agencies primarily serve individuals who are accessing mental health services and are on Medicaid and are reaching a higher level of mental health concerns or disabilities at the time. We have an entire private mental health system that also exists, that may be private practitioners that are funded through a variety of insurance. They may see clients as private pay. And so I think what gets really complicated about the mental health system is that you have a public system and you have a private system. Different than the schools, which are all sort of structured under local superintendents and school districts, but also have this overarching structure from a agency of education. And so what's complicated about the mental health system is that we do have different levels of services that are available for folks. And just to tell you a little bit more about how the Department of Mental Health works, so our responsibility is over the 10 designated agencies that serve about 10,000 kids a year. So that's 10,000 kids statewide. We work really closely with the schools. We have for over 25 years in providing school-based clinicians and behavior interventionists in the schools through a partnership where local school districts contract with the designated agencies or community mental health centers to provide those services in the schools. We do a ton of community-based support, so we're out in the community with kids and families, working on skills, working on addressing mental health concerns, and then we work really closely with families in their homes, helping parents learn skills to parent a child that may have a mental health disability. Working in, we have clinicians that are in offices where kids or families can come in and get private therapy. So what you would hear is the traditional therapy session. So there's lots of variety of ways that mental health services are provided to children and their families. I think one of the other complicating factors in this entire conversation has been the statements of mental illness, and then people assume that violence is perpetrated by people that are mentally ill. While the data tells us a very different story related to that. Only about 3 to 5% of all violence is attributed to a person who's diagnosed with a serious mental illness. And I think what also gets confusing in the mental health arena is that we talk about mental health and mental illness very interchangeable, and that's not necessarily true. Just like you might have a cold or a broken arm, that doesn't mean that you're incapacitated and not able to continue on in your life, just like you might have anxiety or depression that at times impacts your life to different degrees, but doesn't prevent you from living a otherwise productive life. That's different than somebody that's really struggling with a serious mental illness, such as schizophrenia or bipolar, who's also experiencing perhaps hallucinations or some other real impact in their daily lives. And we sort of talk about mental health as if it is one thing, when it is very much a continuum, just like your other health conditions that you may be experiencing. And I say that just because I feel like, again, like Secretary Holcomb was saying, we're really trying to focus on the social emotional development for children and their families so that they have the skills and resources available to deal with everyday stresses. They have the resources and the access to services that can support them in the time of need. I think there's many things that have contributed to the presentation of individuals who have taken upon themselves to create some of the violence that we've been experiencing as a nation. And that includes things like bullying that has been mentioned, but also kids feeling isolated, kids not feeling connected. In Vermont, we do a youth service behavior risk survey every other year, and that shows some degree of kids feeling like they're not valued in their community. And we all have a responsibility to change the direction of that. That's not just about whether we have metal detectors in the schools or we have mental health treatment providers available. That's about how the community sort of wraps around kids and families to support them. So beyond the Department of Mental Health just providing, in general, mental health treatment, as you would traditionally think of it, we're also looking at ways that we can help build those social emotional skills, build parenting skills, strengthen families, work with communities. We have an entire initiative that's starting to roll out called Building Flourishing Communities. It's really looking at what are those things that help people be successful in their communities. We're looking at ways that we can address isolation that kids may feel. I mean, we are a rural state. We partnered with the crisis text line that allows people to text when they're feeling stressed or otherwise in a really tough situation. And some of the data that we're getting out of that shows that isolation is one of the #1 reasons that people are texting. So we as a state have other ways that we can address some of the issues that we're facing by talking about some of these really what feels like low-level response, but are really the things that are most impactful on how people feel connected to their communities and what they're able to access and deal with.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
I'd like to change things up just a little bit here. We've got a bunch of questions backing up, and we've also we've already burned through an hour. Time does fly when you're having fun. So I was wondering if Senator Sears, if you could come to the stage and take a seat. Ladies and gentlemen, Senator Dick Sears. I was happy enough to be here today. So we have these questions could possibly go out to some of the folks who are with us who have yet to take the table. Jen, if you could bring out the microphone to that. I want to ask just one quick follow-up question about to Commissioner Bailey, if you would. It was Secretary Holcomb. I keep getting my commissioners and secretaries wrong.
Don't worry about it.
Hey, you. No. Secretary Holcomb talked about the scarcity of providers in Vermont. What does that look like, and what can the state do to try to change that? Because I've heard that before, and it seems like that's a pretty important factor.
It is absolutely a pretty important factor. So I think one of the things first that we have to recognize in Vermont is we have a really low unemployment rate. So we're often competing for the same folks for the same types of jobs. So that's an important piece of it. But if you go even deeper into the mental health field in general, that is an issue nationwide of the people that are entering a field of mental health, whether it's psychiatry, whether it's social work, clinical mental health. People aren't coming to this field. They're not going to school for this role. So we as professional organizations are really taking a look at that and seeing what are the things that are impacting that. So for example, in psychiatry, it's well recognized that psychiatrists coming out of medical school don't make nearly as much as another specialty medical profession. So there's salary issues that drive what happens across the country. Actually, psychiatry is the second most, I don't know what the right terminology is, the second position in the country that is recruited the most, that people are going after, that we have the least access to because there's so few professionals. I think there's about 40,000 psychiatrists nationwide, and we need many more than that. So I think that that's a driving factor. We've struggled with pay equity in mental health. That's been something that the legislators have been addressing. Last year, they addressed it through infusion of dollars. I think there's lots of contributing. And then when we talk about, quite honestly, mental health with violence, that contributes to the fear of going into this field. So we really, as a professional organizations, have been taking this on and trying to have a different conversation about what a career in mental health could look like.
Thank you. Okay, question. This could be for everybody really quick. Again, we're trying to move this along.
Sure.
What should community members do in the event of an act of violence in a school? Can we be helpful? What can people in the community do when they become aware of act of violence or a threat of an act of violence? Any violence?
Well, if there's a threat, report immediately and let the proper authorities investigate. And I'm going to commend the members of the law enforcement community in the room because I can tell you that they've been incredible in responding to concerns over the last month. But if an event is in process, stay out and wait for the communication because you don't want, as a parent, for example, to be in the way of someone who's trying to respond to an incident.
And I think that plans generally address that. So your local, your plan should address, how parents are what parents are told to respect when an incident occurs, what the communication avenue will be so that they get the necessary information but are not just running to the school when there might be an active or some hazard going on at that time. So that is an area that is addressed in the plans.
And schools have systems now, just as they have systems to notify you about snow days, they have systems in place that will notify you about how to proceed.
I guess that plays this other question: do schools have a policy in case of if a gun threat is stated and explained? And and what about a shooting on a school bus or a threat on a school bus? I guess that's a little more specific, but I guess that sort of follows up what you were talking about.
As I said earlier, we try to plan for all hazards, not just what we think of as an active shooter in a school, somebody walking into a school and shooting. So when we're doing these plannings and the trainings, it's really toward all hazards. It could be a bus accident, a bus going off the road. What do how are you dealing with that sort of accident, the hazard that takes place either in the school or outside of school but affects the schools?
Okay. Another one. Do you think the easy access to guns is a contributory factor to gun violence in the United States compared to other countries without access, such as Australia?
Do I think?
Oh, no, do you think that easy access to guns is a contributing factor to gun violence?
I guess I have not studied that issue. I mean, there's a certain logic to it, but there's a certain logic to it, but it's certainly a tool that's used in connection with violence.
Okay, just sort through this. All right, I think what we're going to do now is we're going to transfer over to Senator Sears and talk about what the legislature is doing with regards to these issues as we've been discussing.
First of all, thank the students, thank all of you for being here. This is an incredibly important issue. Believe it or not, the legislature actually studies issues and tries to come up with legislation that will help. We do listen to all sides. We hear from law enforcement, we hear from, particularly when it comes to firearms, we're hearing from a lot of different groups. Last year I introduced S-221, which is an extreme risk protection order bill. And that bill is designed to deal with when there's an imminent risk. It is through the civil system of law, through the family court, and not the criminal. So it's not when a criminal act has happened. It's when somebody is exhibiting those red flags that they're about to be in trouble. I think we talked a little bit about hear something, say something, and then do something. And I think that's what this bill is built on, and it would allow for the taking of firearms for a period of 15 days, and then there's a court hearing to determine whether or not to continue or not. we also have to follow the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the state of Vermont. And I know a lot of people talk about the Second Amendment, but we also have the Fourth Amendment against search and seizure, and that comes into play particularly in H. 22, which is a bill that when there's probable cause to believe domestic violence has occurred, how do you take the guns away from the perpetrator? And we're struggling in Senate Judiciary right now with the issue of the Fourth Amendment and also the 11th Amendment to the Vermont Constitution, which is very specific in terms of search and seizure. Secondly, we have the 16th article of the Vermont Constitution, which, unlike the Second Amendment, which is unlimited, the 16th article of the Vermont Constitution says we as Vermonters have a right to defend ourselves. And that is pretty clear. There's no ambiguity about that. So any law we write needs to be constitutional. We have S55 that some of the students talk about that came out of my committee. I chair the Senate Judiciary Committee. That bill was added to through a floor amendment on the universal background check. Then there were some other things added to it. Went over to the House. They're currently working on it. I do meet regularly with the House chair of the House Judiciary Committee, and we will be talking about how we deal with that bill. So they have S221 right now and S55 that they're dealing with. We're dealing with H422, and then we have another bill that we're going to add some school safety issues to. And in terms of, number one, it is a crime to have a weapon on school grounds, but it is a misdemeanor. There'll be a discussion about making that a felony. Secondly, how do you deal with threats? And I think that anyone would tell you that's read the affidavit in the case in Fairhaven, that it's extremely difficult to make those charges. And we'll see what happens through the court process. But this bill would allow us to deal with threats in a different manner than we do now. I just want to look at Vermont's firearm problem, and the Commissioner of Mental Health mentioned it. 92% of the cases in Vermont are suicides, were gun deaths. In a 5-year period, there were about 450 firearm-related deaths. 45 of those were classified as homicide. The remainder were suicides. That 90% to 92%, and that's where the imminent risk bill comes in. In Connecticut, where they have that type of legislation, they saw around 60% of the people that had guns taken from them were people who were suicidal. They were not active shooters or other, they were suicidal, I won't say just. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. As we try to develop legislation, we need to focus on Vermont's problem, not on a problem, in Chicago, which has a very different climate. Also, I don't think we have a mental health problem. I don't think mental health system can stop active shooters. These folks cannot be involuntarily committed. That's the difficult place to reach. And so if you had somebody like the case in Fairhaven or other cases that we've read about, could the mental health system deal with them? Yes, they can provide counseling and so forth. But unless they can be involuntarily committed and they reach that level, that system doesn't solve that problem. And so I really get fearful, just as I get fearful when I hear about arming teachers, I get fearful about the idea that the mental health system, and we have a mental health problem. We have a problem in Vermont anyway, of dealing with folks that feel isolated, feel hopeless. And many of these young people, and I dealt with young people at 204 Depot for 35 odd years, I can tell you, they feel helpless and hopeless. And when we identify that, that's where we need to take some action. And the school discipline bill that I proposed a few years ago, I remember saying to the secretary, why can't we be more like Texas? Because Texas has developed a lot of good programs in terms of school discipline. I think isolating people contributes to this problem. So it's not simple. We do have 4 bills we're working on. What the House does with S-55 is up in the air. That's where the assault weapons ban was. I believe he's withdrawn that. The waiting period, the magazine capacity, and several other issues.
Actually, I've got a question specifically about S-55, asking, would you support an amendment to S-55 for a ban on high-capacity magazines and semi-automatics that qualify as quote-unquote assault weapons? And the follow-up is, why did you vote against S-55 in the 17-13 vote? I don't know which
Pardon
specifically.
me? I didn't hear the
Oh, the second one was, why did you vote against S-55 in the 17-13 vote? I don't know which vote that was.
I voted against S-55 because of the universal background check was added to it. I don't believe that that's enforceable. I believe that it gives a false sense of security, and that private sales are something that occurs on a routine basis in Vermont, and you're not going to control that. What you're going, I mean, the drug dealer from Holyoke, Mass, coming to Bennington, Vermont, to trade drugs for guns is not going to go through a background check. What you're doing is taking people, in my view, and this is just my view, but I got to vote, is that you're not fixing a problem. And that's why I voted against it, and that's why I voted against S-13. The magazines, I'm willing to listen to the debate. We didn't deal with it in the Senate Judiciary Committee. I'm happy to have any discussion in Senate Judiciary Committee about any of those issues. But right now, that's going on in House Judiciary.
Okay.
As I said, I'll be meeting with the chair of the House Judiciary Committee to see where she's at.
All right, one more quick question. If you can clarify universal background checks and what's different from what we have currently, if there's a way to do that quickly.
Well, right now,
I want to
we
switch
have-
out the panels.
Yeah, I want to make clear, we have a universal background check, but my philosophy is we should look at who shouldn't possess firearms. And that's what I've been doing throughout my career. We started with guns in schools, and we banned that. That was not an easy one to deal with, believe it or not. We had a lot of opposition. I got an F from one of those gun owners groups out of that one. And then we looked at various criminal crimes, and Vermont had nothing going along with the federal law about who could possess a firearm, for example, felons. So we changed that law, and we had a state law that makes it illegal for people who've committed a violent felony, or a violent misdemeanor for that matter, to possess a firearm. So our local police, our state police can arrest on that. We also report now people who are deemed to be mentally ill by a court to the national background check. And I believe there was about 580 people who got reported to the background check from that bill. So it isn't as if we're working in isolation. And again, from me, that was why I voted against it. Actually, I was the sponsor and the reporter of the original bill, which had to do with firearm storage, which the commissioner needs badly, believe it or not. He's got about 1,100 firearms stored somewhere in Montpelier. Luckily, he won't tell me where they are. He's paying quite a bit of money to whoever's storing them, and it's aggravating.
All right, let's change our panel out now. I'd like to thank all of you for taking the time to be with us today. Stick around if you can, if we'll have more questions. Right now, I'd like to invite up, let's see, our state police, our commissioner of schools here in Bennington, and our school safety officer, and our executive director of UCS. I think that just will move this on. Thank you all for your patience again as we move on here. Was there anyone who wanted to ask a question by microphone really quick while we've got a moment?
I want to talk on microphone, but it's not going to be quick.
Okay, we can maybe wait for the end then. All right, we have with us now, if I can remember everyone's name.
Do you want us to introduce ourselves?
Yes, please do.
Jim Culkeen, Superintendent of Schools, Southwest Vermont Supervisory Union.
Vic Milani, Safety Coordinator for SVSU.
Lieutenant Treya with the Vermont State Police, our Bureau of Criminal Investigation.
Lieutenant Tom Mosier, I'm the Shasbury Barracks Commander.
Lorna Matern, Executive Director of United Counseling Service.
Thank you all for joining us. As time is growing a little short, so if you very quickly talk a little bit about your role with gun safety and school safety issues, just sort of roll through it in a couple minutes, and then we'll sort of start getting into more robust question session here. We'll do a couple specific questions for some of you. Superintendent Culkeen, if you could tell me a little bit about, I've had a couple specific questions about just sort of how things work at, if you and Mr. Milani could talk a little bit specifically about how things, what you do at Mount Anthony and at the schools in the SVSU to keep students safe.
So 15 months ago, we did not have a school safety coordinator with the supervisory union. So we created the position. Mr. Milani already worked for us at Mount Anthony Union High School. He had an extensive background in law enforcement prior to coming to work with us. So it's a stipend position through the SVSU, and it was a result that had been set for me 2 years ago as superintendent, and I turned to Vic with his background, first thing being to revise our school safety plans. I wasn't convinced that every school had one, and a lot of things that you've mentioned, like we're already doing as far as training. Someone mentioned a question about an issue with the school buses. That's the next training that school bus safety that Vic is training. So I'd rather turn it over to Vic right now to talk about some of the specific trainings that we've done with our staff and students.
Thank you. As was mentioned by the Commissioner, one of the most important things that we have to do is be prepared. And in order to do that, as Mr. Culkeen said, we had to make sure that we had emergency operation plans in place that identified all sorts of threats and hazards that might present itself at each of our schools. So part of our emergency operation plan does include a protocol for all threats and hazards that we thought might be either a medium or high risk at a particular school. In addition to that, we certainly had to prepare for containments, certainly lockdowns in the event that we were confronted with an active shooter. We obviously drilled different scenarios as far as lockdown 5 times during the year. Our emergency operation plans also have to identify reunification sites should we have to evacuate the campus. What would be our protocol for moving students to that evacuation site and for parents to be able to reunite with the students upon completion of the event. So all of those and more are included in all your emergency operation plans now for all of our schools. In addition to that, we certainly wanted to be certain that all of our schools had a secure perimeter. And by that, I mean that we wanted to make sure that during the school day, all of our schools' entryways were locked. And we have accomplished that. In addition to that, we wanted to ensure that when entry is allowed, that this entry is monitored. So in our schools, we have monitored entry now by video. This past month, I offered a 7-hour training to all of the reception and secretarial staff in the district that really outlined protocol for allowing someone admission into our schools. It included recognizing suspicious activities, what are the red flags, certainly dealing with emotional persons, either anger, outbursts, and certainly how to deal with somebody that might be confronting them with a weapon. That training consisted of 19 different videoed scenarios that we critiqued and discussed with associated modules of instruction. So we really feel now that we have a situation where we can afford our students safety and security throughout the school day by having our perimeter secure. In addition to that, we've conducted safety assessments. We've looked at video monitoring systems. We've looked at telecommunications. As the Commissioner mentioned, as part of our protocol for emergency operation plans, every school has a safety committee. That safety committee meets regularly with the community partners to discuss any issues or concerns that might be brought before them. I'm happy to report that certainly in the SVSU, we have an outstanding relationship with our community partners, law enforcement, state police, as well as Bennington Police Department. Just today, we conducted one of the assessments that Secretary Holcomb mentioned at one of our SVSU schools. We're continuing to do that. These assessments are conducted by either state police or Bennington officers. The people that are usually present at that include the superintendent, myself, and we're also collaborating to have all law enforcement who might respond to any type of scenario present at these assessments. So we are moving forward. We have 2 additional trainings that I'm working on right now, as superintendent mentioned, one to deal with school bus safety, talking about what are the types of safety protocol we want to see exercised as the students are waiting at the school bus, boarding the bus, riding the bus, exiting from the bus, in addition to evacuation procedures. We're looking at a training that I'm working on as well for all faculty and staff in the SVSU, that we really define different types of threats and how we evaluate and assess those threats. So we feel that we want to train all of our faculty and staff who are in charge of classroom settings to be able to recognize threats. Our whole approach is proactive. Certainly, as you heard many of our speakers tonight indicate, we cannot just react anymore. We've got to be proactive. We've got to take steps to try and prevent any of these types of incidents from occurring. So that's kind of where we are in the SVSU district right now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Malani. I appreciate it. Detective Treya, Detective Lieutenant Treya, excuse me, if you could talk to me a little bit about yourself and about your role in terms of interfacing with these sorts of investigations. Whatever specifics you might want to, I mean, you might not be able to share a whole lot of specifics about the Fairhaven case, and perhaps might choose not to. But you sort of talk about what goes into a case of a threat, when it from in the way that state police deal with it, from the report that comes in by phone or from a tip to the way that progresses from, in terms of your investigation.
So we have a team of detectives that work out of Beach Room, which is basically we have 3 barracks and we have a number of about 10 detectives all together. And at any one time, especially in the Fairhaven case, we can call all those detectives together who are highly trained in order to conduct interviews, to recover evidence, and to work on the case and work with specific other agencies in the investigation. I can't talk a lot about the Fairhaven case because it still is an active case. But the one thing I can stress to you is that this case came together because someone said something. Now, I know that we've said a lot about, if you see something, say something. Folks, in the past, I've read a lot and I've seen a lot of these school shootings, and I always hear somebody say something, oh, I knew something was up, or boy, I thought something was wrong with that. And then I look at that and say, well, why didn't you say something? All of law enforcement would rather go and investigate 10 complaints that turn out to be nothing than that one where somebody held something back and then it turned into. We had a young lady who brought something forward to us and we were able to take that and move forward in the case that you've all read about. So the most important part that I want to bring to this, and to really any investigation, is that if you see something that you don't think is right, you hear something, report it. You know, we've had a number of people come forward with us, and, you know, we've been able to make some very good cases, and we were able to take this case where it was because of that. So if you take anything out of this, if you see something, hear something, or if you just sense something, please don't hold that inside. Tell somebody, and let us do the job that you pay us for.
Can I interject something? Something happened here in Bennington a while ago, and before reporting to you, they put it on social media. How do you handle that? Grant you she was wrong to go through social media. They should report it to the law enforcement. We had something very serious that possibly would have happened.
Okay,
So
thank you.
I spoke out.
Thank you, that's okay.
I'm
Thank you.
well aware of that
Something
situation, and it was reported immediately. I actually, from my house, got a tip on this. So the first thing I did is I reached out to my partner, which is Chief Doucette, and I called him. We know each other on a first-name basis, and I said, Paul, I want to talk to you about something here. And as soon as I started talking to him about it, he says, you know what, Reg, we've got this. We know all about it, and we're working towards that. So just because you might hear later on the fact doesn't mean that we hadn't been working on this for hours, sometimes even days before.
Thank you. Lieutenant Moser, if you could talk a little bit about the Shaftesbury Barracks and its interaction with area schools and with Bennington Police and with Manchester Police.
Sure, you mentioned earlier that we never write about the planes that landed.
Yeah.
So I kind of wanted to talk about that because we've been working on school safety for the last 20 years, like the commissioner mentioned. And we don't talk about the things that go right. So I just want to take just a few moments to talk about the things that we have been doing over the last 20 years that have gone right. Most of our schools in Vermont have security systems. They have cameras. They have magnetic locks that can keep people out or keep students in. They do continuous drills at this point every month or every other month, which is different than what they did 20 years ago. They're using technology today to see what's going on in the hallways, and we can actually use that technology on the outside and see what's going on in the schools. Arlington is one of the schools in the area that's working on that. So at some point in the near future, we'll be able to use an iPad and I can be able to see what's actually going on in the school real time. And we're using all this technology to enhance our safety. We've gone through the assessing of the schools with the administrators. Today I was in Shaftesbury Elementary School with the two gentlemen to my right, and we did about an hour and a half assessment of the school. We're building those relationships between the law enforcement officers and our students. We're developing school crisis plans that have been implemented. In this case of Shaftesbury Elementary School, the last time we were there was last year, and there's a new plan in place. I received it today, and we have that on hand at the barracks, along with the other schools in Bennington County. As far as the Shaftesbury Barracks is concerned, we've recently implemented last summer a Police Explorer program in Shaftesbury. It's one of the first ones in the state. So we're actually working with our young 11th and 12th grade students that potentially want to get into emergency services, whether that be law enforcement, fire, or rescue. It's something we haven't seen before. And we recently just assigned trooper liaisons to each school, something that we hadn't had in the last 5 or 10 years, but because of what's been going on the last few months, we decided what we wanted to do was be able to reach out to the schools that don't have those school resource officers. The smaller schools like Woodford, the smaller schools like Stamford, the lower part of our state. And we've changed our training since Columbine. You know, that was 20 years ago. We've come a long way with how we tactically respond to any type of emergency crisis, not just a school shooting. It could be a hazmat spill. It could be a bus that's overturned. It could be a derailment that might have been just 2 or 3 blocks from the school. So we're working on that kind of thing.
Are you good?
Yeah, I'm all set.
Thank you very much. Never know when I want to be polite with Lieutenant Moser because someday I might be driving up Route 7A going 45 and a 30.
We'll see. 45 minutes.
Okay, Ms. Matern, if you could, I know that the Commissioner talked a little bit about the her assessment of so the need for professionals from a statewide basis, and sort of what the state was doing in terms of assessment and outreach. Just wonder if you could talk a little bit specifically about what you're seeing at UCS and about the kind of need you might be seeing among students, maybe students who have an emotional need, or students who are nervous about what they see on the television.
Sure. Well, I could start out by letting folks know that we have school-based clinicians that are licensed mental health clinicians placed in 8 schools around the county. So that provides pretty much immediate access to a mental health professional within the school. And it also provides access for the adults in the school to consult with a mental health clinician if they have a concern for a student. The other thing is we also have in 15 doctors' offices, we also have clinicians placed, including pediatricians' offices. So if a parent or a doctor has a concern about a child or about a family, that again, there's immediate access to mental health services that are available, certainly. So we do have all of those services currently available. We are seeing at United Counseling Service, just as Melissa had mentioned across the state, openings, our vacancies are typically right now for licensed mental health clinicians. We actually have, I think, 5 vacancies currently, which is really quite a large vacancy pool. And we're having difficulty recruiting, and whether it's what Commissioner Bailey talked about, which was our people not wanting to get into this field, but it's also partly because of pay, frankly. And that part of what the legislature has started to do, and I hope will continue to do, is look at pay equity so we can recruit folks, because these are the really pivotal roles that our staff play in being able to connect with students, with young people, with families, and being able to provide that 2-generational approach to families and helping them learn resiliency, learn coping skills, be connected to their community, and without those positions, it becomes much more difficult to be able to provide the services that are necessary.
Thank you very much. I think at this point we'll start going through some of the other questions we have. Oh, go ahead, please.
One thing I wanted
please
to
go
add,
ahead.
While I have everybody gathered here, whether it's our elected officials or our state officials, one thing as a superintendent, a challenge that we have, when we have a threat, and our assessment team does an assessment, and it comes back that it's valid. If we make the decision to remove a student from school while either it's being investigated or while it's playing out legally, we still have an obligation to educate that child. And finding the place to do that while keeping everyone safe is a tremendous challenge. So whether it's guidelines from the state or whether it's a legislative act that gives us some leeway on where that can happen, that is assistance as a superintendent that we really could use, because it is a real scenario for us. So that's whatever I want everyone to understand, that we still have that obligation to educate that child, threat or no threat.
Thank you. Okay, I think I'm going to start rolling through some more of these questions, and we can have some opportunity for folks to ask questions by microphone. We can try to get answers from folks. There's one question here. It does not say which school district it came from, but it alleges that a child was threatened with gun violence and it wasn't reported, and that the question is, what should we do as parents when our teachers and superintendent tell you that this is not the most important thing on their plate?
Well, that was not said by this superintendent. So.
Okay.
Yes, it was.
No. Certainly not.
All right. Well, let's have the discussion later. Okay. This is a question for Mr. Sears. Jennifer, if you can bring the microphone down to Senator Sears. When Connecticut enforced through thorough background checks after Sandy Hook, deaths fell by 40%. Quinnipiac polls show that 90% of Americans want stricter background checks. Why is this not happening in Vermont?
If anybody thinks that one law makes that difference, I just don't believe that. Background checks may pass. It's part of F-55 that passed the Senate, may pass the House, may pass the House, may get signed by the governor. We'll see what happens. But if you look at state by state, Vermont is like number 9 with some of the loosest firearm laws in the country, right next to Connecticut, Maryland, and above Maryland and above Illinois. So again, you look at what is the problem in Vermont? What are we trying to address? So while I voted against that, it may pass. I voted against things that pass all the time. And I vote for things that pass a lot. So again, my focus has been on keeping guns out of the hands of people that shouldn't have guns and shouldn't be using weapons, whether they be explosives. We haven't talked at all about explosives.
No.
And that's the problem.
That's a big problem in Austin right now.
Yeah. So, and that's one of the things that S-221 seeks to address. It's not just firearms, but any explosive weapon, hand grenade, homemade bomb, like the marathon bomb. So I think it's beyond that.
Thank you. This, again, for anyone else on the panel here or in the panel still in the audience, how does our legal system address gun owners who are negligent in keeping their guns stored safely and an incident occurs as a result? What does the law say about storage and about sort of the chain of custody if a gun that was improperly stored is used in the commission of a crime? Does anyone want to take a swing at that?
Well, I mean, if a weapon is used in the commission of the crime, we are going to look at the person who used that. We're also going to look at the reasoning why. We have a whole host of abilities that we can use, especially with the state's attorney's office. We work hand in hand with them, bring cases to them, and they can look at this and say, okay, this is where it fits in. So, we want to hold people accountable. It's also basic common sense. My guns are all locked up. My guns are all secured, but that's just the way I am, the way I was brought up, and it's just the safest aspect for me. So, if somebody is using a weapon inappropriately, carelessly, there are laws that we can use to deal with that situation.
Thank you. This is a bit of an on-the-spot question for everybody while we're doing that. This questioner asks if any of the folks in the panels believe in greater gun control other than the students. The question asks if anyone on any of the panels believes in greater gun control. Doesn't specify how, but anyone?
I'd be happy to answer that.
Go ahead.
Well, one thing that I certainly agree with is that we need greater research into gun violence and gun violence prevention. And that I'm not sure if people are familiar with the Dickey Amendment, which is a federal amendment that essentially states that the CDC cannot do any research around gun violence or gun violence prevention. And so something as simple as being able to take a look at the data, being able to collect the data and do some research on how to make gun ownership, guns safer, as actually it was done with automobiles and Secretary Holcomb made mention to vehicle deaths. And at the time when the CDC looked at vehicle deaths, the vehicle manufacturers were saying, oh, the problem is the nuts behind the wheel, is actually what they were saying, and they didn't want to look at the investigation of that. And as a result of investigating deaths and having a national registry and data collection, it resulted in safety like seat belts and child restraint and so forth. And as a result of that research, deaths by automobile decreased by 80%. And so I think that if nothing else, we could continue to have this opinion. You had talked about how you went to the state Senate and there was all these opinions thrown around. And I think it would be much more helpful if our opinion were based on facts and based on data and based on research. But because of the Dickey Amendment, the CDC's hands are tied and they cannot go forward with doing that research. So we don't even have good research to make good decisions about it.
Thank you. It is 7:55, so the time is growing short, of course, despite. If we could maybe go to microphone questions at this point to sort of to wrap this thing up over the next few minutes. If there's anyone who wants to, Mr. Cameraman. Oh, we have someone else over. I can't see. The house lights are straight in my eyes. If you could just give your name and just speak briefly, as time is short.
Yes, my name is Barbara Sarvis, and I'm an educator, and I'd like to know why automatic machine guns people can buy them. Military people have to leave those back in the barracks. They can't even take them home. So why are we allowing 18-year-old children to buy them?
You can't.
I don't understand this.
Is that...
I don't care if you have a shotgun to go out and kill your deer.
Can I answer that?
Yeah.
You can't. They're already illegal. They're banned. For
What,
you to go
automatic
through and get a
machine gun?
fully automatic
I'm talking about the assault weapons
Right.
that these people
Right.
went, these young men went
Okay.
out and bought.
I can
right.
take the mic if you
They
like.
should not be
All right,
legal.
we're not gonna yell at each other. We're not gonna yell at each other. Okay, everyone be cool.
I think one of the big problems here is education, right? And this is on a whole bunch of levels, but assault weapons, we've tried this before, right? The definition of assault ban keeps on changing. What we've heard tonight is a lot of one side. I should start by introducing myself. My name's Kevin Hoyt. I lived here in Bennington, born and raised here. I'm a fourth generation Vermonter. Like most Vermonters, the outdoor natural resources, our wildlife, guns, our Second Amendment is one of my core values. I think it's a core part of who we are as a Vermonter. Machine guns are already illegal. You can't buy a fully automatic weapon. What we're talking about when we say an AR-15 is a semi-automatic weapon, and that's a problem. This is the same gun that I was taught with. Again, I learned how to shoot when I was 7 years old by my father. He taught me on a Ruger 10-22. It's a small caliber, low recoil gun. Taught all 5 of my kids how to shoot on the same exact weapon. It's actually my grandfather's handed down. That's the weapon that you guys are talking about banning when you say semi-automatic. My shotgun that I turkey hunt in another month and a half is the weapon that you're talking about banning. The problem that I have with gun control...
Can I ask you something for a minute?
Sure.
When you have your gun,
Yes, ma'am.
how many rounds of bullets can you go through in
In that
10
Ruger
seconds?
10-22, I've got 50 round clips. I can put 50 rounds in. And again, if I'm hunting coyotes or if I'm protecting land in Texas where it's overrun with wild boar, I might want more than one.
Can I
Same
ask
thing
you
with
something?
self-defense.
I
The
just want
idea
to-
is for the bad guys to run out of bullets before me.
Do you think that a young man who's 18 years old or a young woman
Uh-huh.
should be allowed at the age of 18 to buy a weapon like that?
Ma'am, I've hunted with kids 5 and 6 years old. I'm a hunter education instructor. I'm a conservationist. This is what I do for a living. I teach people from a very, very early age. And the problem that I have with gun control is it doesn't work. We've done this.
We're not going to shout. We are not going to shout, please.
Let me say my piece. It's hands down proven that the more access that citizens have to firearms, the lower firearm reduction rates are. These kids that weren't born in time, we actually tried an assault rifle ban, right? In 1994, we tried a 10-year study. We banned assault rifles, the definition back then. Part of that was a comprehensive study. We put millions of dollars into this to see if it actually worked, right? The FBI...
All right. Okay, I have a follow-up question for everybody, actually, based on what you're saying.
I thought we were supposed to hear both sides.
We are. Well, I mean, yes, but it is getting late. If you could.
Okay, let's talk about school safety. And again, as much as I would love to debate gun control with you, I've got an idea that will actually work. Okay, they're talking about a short-term solution that's going to arm our schools, that's going to protect us. 96% of all these shootings are happening in gun-free zones. That tells me that it doesn't work. Where's the liability for that gun law that we passed, right? So again, I'm talking about adult teachers that are trained, certified. Listen to me.
Okay.
Let me say my piece.
Yeah, okay, just if you could wrap it up, I have a follow-up
We
question.
don't want it. Okay,
I'd like to say something.
these are trained, certified teachers that are trained by the state already. We've got certifications in place. They're trained to both teach and concealed carry. If you don't like that, we can leave it out. The long-term solution is something that's been proven to reduce gun violence, right? It's proven to reduce. You don't like that. You don't like the idea of education. You don't even know what my idea is yet. The only thing that I've heard here is we want to take guns. We want to maybe arm or secure our schools, but we don't know how, who to trust to do it, or how to pay for it. I've got the solution if you guys will let me talk and hear me out. You're not interested in hearing education. I've got something that's proven to reduce gun violence, right? It's proven to. In a long term, again, through education and training. I hear we want to test. We want to test for people to shoot a gun just like a car. Anybody with me? You want people to be qualified before they're? My answer covers that, right? It's a golden standard for firearm safety training. It also teaches conservation, the environment, the planet, climate control. Are you guys interested in that? Outdoor survival and first aid, critical thinking. How about compassion, understanding, and then finally gun safety and responsible gun ownership. These things that everybody should, I think, every school in America should teach this. And of course, it secures our natural resources, which for Vermont is very, very important. Talking about the International Hunter Education Association, it's something that's accepted by all 50 states and throughout the world. Comes with standardized curriculum. We've got teachers already in place. These teachers have their background checks.
Okay.
Right? They've already been certified. Funding, both state and federal. And the best part is we can mandate it on a local level. Our local school boards can put this into place.
Okay, I need to ask you to stop. All right, okay, just because we have a bunch of other folks. I think there's, what we've uncovered here is there is, natural tension between folks who feel very differently about weapons.
Intention. I'm trying to get it.
Yeah, but
educational base.
Right.
This isn't
Well, no.
this
Okay,
isn't a
what's that?
program
You've had your opportunity.
course.
You've had your opportunity. Okay.
This is
All right.
about education.
Well, I have a question for you.
If you're interested in guns, then I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not taking part in the admission, the implementation of those, and I am not going to take part in the participation. I'm a good guy. When you guys go to collect guns, I'm not giving up mine.
All right,
What
good.
makes you think the bad guys are going up?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, the filibuster's over. Okay, thank you. Thank you, please.
I would really love to hear from the students.
Tyler, you have a question? Okay. This is going to get me in more trouble. Jen, you have a microphone?
We did have a question back here in terms of.
Oh, okay, go ahead. We do have an order here. And let's try to stop the yelling at each other over the microphone. Let's try to stick this one at a time. Thank you very much for your time.
I'd just like to run something by everybody in this room. I think the simple way out of this, the most cost-effective way out of it, is instead of building new police barracks and stations and everything all over the place, combine them with the high schools in the big cities, like Bennington or Burlington or Middlebury. I know it's going to stress the students, but it not only protect them, but it would also cut down on the drugs.
Thank you. Yeah. I have a question. So this fellow, a couple folks down here had hands up, and Tyler, let's going to wrap it up. If you would, please.
There's a little bit of jumping out about the gun situation. I think everyone's doing a good job talking about the schools and stuff and how actually they were talking about, all you guys have been up there talking about other things besides guns actually, because somebody could go into a school and when everyone's going out to get on the buses, run everybody over with a truck with a plow on it. Does that mean we're going to regulate the size of the plow on the truck or something like that? And no, the gun is not the issue. It's school safety. A gun, a truck, that's totally different. They've already said there's no problem basically by looking at the statistics they've said with gun violence, so why try to ban guns if that's not an issue? Let's put our money towards something that makes more sense.
Okay.
Like the pill problem or the drugs, stuff like that, that's gonna actually make a difference. The guns are not gonna make a difference, it's here. The drugs, the stuff like that, in the schools, let's get it all out and concentrate on something that makes sense rather than something that somebody don't like.
Okay, thank you very much. Gentleman in front here, I think.
Yes, I'd like to remind everybody, we have a monument right over here in Old Bennington. It's ironic that we're here. That monument is to memorize, in memory of the Revolutionary War, and when those fellows got our freedom, which you're talking about piecemeal taking away, the very second amendment was the right to bear arms, and it says it shall not be infringed on. That's what we're talking about here tonight. And all we've heard mostly until the end is one side of the issue. You ought to be ashamed. You should have had a student that had a different point of view. All three of them had the same point of view. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. Thank you.
That was raining. That wasn't planned. Jen, I think, we have one more here, then over here, and then they'll wrap it up.
As Ms. Matern said, there's been very little studied about this issue. It's about gun violence. And the reason for that is the Dickey Amendment, which was passed by Congress, so you can't get adequate evidence-based behavior. However, there have been some public health schools who have studied it. And what they found is, at Boston University School of Public Health, for every 1% increase in gun ownership, you have a 1% increase in gun fatalities. There's a definite relation to how many guns are available to how many people die. And we're not talking about the 30,000 deaths only. 80,000 people a year are wounded. You have to start to think about why gun owners and gun manufacturers do not have to pay for that. That cost is spread across the whole society. Why is that? If Saint-Gobain makes a product that causes PFOA, they're responsible for it. It's called an externality. And all economists believe that that's the purview of the manufacturer to pay the cost. Left, right, liberal, conservative, they all believe that. But that's not true in the gun industry.
Okay, thank you. I think we have time for maybe two more. We have this fellow here, we have Tyler, I think that's, okay, we have one more in back, okay, that's three.
So my question.
Well, I didn't see you, I'm sorry.
No, the question for Mr. Corky.
I think maybe you better address that, so I'll tie it on the form.
I could just answer that very quickly in a general term, that if you have a concern that's not, that you don't feel you're getting the answer to, come to your local law enforcement, whether it be us or the Bennington Sheriff's Department or the Bennington PD. Well, there's always, you can always go up the chain. Everybody's got a boss. I have a boss, he has a boss, and then ultimately.
I called the state of Vermont legal team, and even there got closed doors. So.
Yeah, if you're not happy with the answer you get, you always move up.
We went to private school. That's what happened.
All right, Jeff.
One thing I'd just like to point out is, for all the gun supporters in here, we sat here respectfully for over 2 hours and listened to the other side. And as soon as we started presenting our side, it started to get into yelling and stuff, and then those people left, and now we gotta quickly shut down. What Mr. Hoyt was trying to say, I had my 10-year-old daughter here earlier. She shot guns since she was 6 years old. She hunts with an AR-15. Fully legal, 5-shot magazine. It's a upbringing and instilling the value of human life and how to properly use guns and growing up with it. We used to talk about guns when I was in school. We used to bring them to school in our trucks and go hunting after school 30 years ago.
Kids, when I was in high school, kids did the same thing.
And now you can't even mention the word gun, but some teachers flip out. It happened 2 years ago in Molly Stark and in Shasberry. If we could have some type of hunter safety, not even hunter safety, firearm safety in school, especially in a state like Vermont, it would teach kids from a young age respect of guns, how to use them, safety with them, and then they would know as they got older, see something, say something. If somebody is doing something or acting out of the ordinary, then they would know what to report, not just, oh yeah, get complacent about it or be immune to it, like the students said. There was 3 students up here that were anti, obviously. There is more out there that are, that hunt and fish and shooting sports too. Forest shooting sports is another big thing in our area. But you can't even talk about it in school now. We need to address these issues.
If I may, sir, I'm a law enforcement officer.
I was for 16 years
I'm
too.
a Vermonter,
Yep.
and I am an avid sportsman with a number of gentlemen here in this room. And I personally, I do see your point. Your point has a lot of where I'm at. But I also understand that we probably need to have a conversation because, as you said, that other side, there's always 2 sides of every story, including in any investigation. So somebody comes up and accuses somebody of something, well, there's that other side of the story. If we don't listen to the other side of the story, no matter what part you're on, we're not going to come to any type of solution. All we're going to have is bickering back and forth. So both sides need to be respectful.
Well, that was my point of order here, is that we listened for 2 hours and took in, I obviously heard some really good things, magazine capacities that Senator Sears talked about. Definitely something very viable from the other side, then yes, there's definitely stuff that could be listened to. But as soon as we started talking as gun supporters, it got out of hand here. And you had to ask, we got to shut this down soon. They need to hear our side as gun supporters in order to understand. The lady said these semi-automatic machine guns these 18-year-olds are buying. They're not buying semi-automatic machine guns because she didn't know what she was talking about. All right. She needs to hear our side to understand what the problem is. Rather than just ban them, machine guns are already banned. Why don't we also look at video games?
Okay, thank you. I think we do have that back and forth we've got to figure out. I think it's part of the reason that we're trying to have this conversation today is because it's a difficult conversation. Flat out, period, paragraph. Yes, sir. And then I'll come down this way and we'll finish.
Well, thank you. I kind of enjoyed the discussion this evening. Is this thing working?
It is. It's good.
Some of the things that were brought forth, probably could turn around and look at it to the gun owner also, such as avoid alienation and isolation. Because I think that's what S55 is pretty much doing. It's alienating the Vermonters who have it in their blood to own a firearm in accordance with Article 16, which is all about protection of yourself and of the state, as defined in our Constitution. That's the only reason for Article 15. It has nothing to do with hunting. It has nothing to do with a hobby. And there's a community out there that is a resource that can be utilized. Not every school is in downtown Bennington. The law enforcement isn't going to make it to every school before it's over. And mama and papa ain't going to stand outside their school when their baby's inside getting blasted. It just is not going to happen. We should be able to utilize the local resources available without alienation. We can work together on this. Thank you.
Thanks.
One other thing. After incidences, you always find people coming together, moments of silence, and in the end, they all come together to pray. My suggestion is we should pray before incidents happen. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. We had one more here, and then I'll let the students have they have the first word. I think, Tyler, you're going to want the last word. Was there anyone else? Tyler, and then, oh, wait a minute. Who else had their hand up?
Way over on the other end.
Run, Jen, run.
Been running all night.
I want to thank you all for your patience.
Everybody hear me?
Yes.
Good. I don't normally get into debates, and I sit here and listen. Actually, I get a little sick into my stomach listening to all this crap going on here. I hear gun debates, I hear this, take this gun away, take that gun away, magazines, this guy's got too many bullets, this guy's got too many guns. I've been here almost 2 hours now, and I haven't heard one word about the mental problem.
Oh, we've had plenty of those.
No, talking discussion about the actual statistics
discussion.
of who's actually doing these killings. I've never known a gun yet that walked and jumped into my hand and killed somebody, unless I was somebody was mental that was using that gun. And 98% of your killings have been somebody that was mental. Okay?
Actually, that's not true.
That's not true.
What's true is 3 to 5% of all violent acts are committed by people with a mental illness, which means 95 to 97 are committed by people like you and me.
Okay, the last 5 major shootings we've had, have they not been mental?
They've not.
They've not. How about the recent one?
Park looking like yesterday. They tried to commit him 2 years ago.
How about the
Under
recent
Vapor
one?
Act. So you can't tell us that.
They all have. That's all I got to say.
Thank you. Okay, let's wrap this up then.
So yeah, I got some things to say. First of all, a lot of people quote the part of the Second Amendment that says the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, but the entire Second Amendment reads, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And it wasn't until 2008 in the Supreme Court case D.C. v. Heller that the individual right to own a gun was actually decided by the Supreme Court. And even in that decision, the most conservative justice on the Supreme Court, Justice Antonin Scalia, stated that the right to own guns, like any other right in the Bill of Rights, is not unlimited. And there are certainly cases where non-traditional guns or guns that have the capacity to do horrible things to society would not be available to civilians. And the Supreme Court has followed that precedent for the 250 plus years that it's been in operation. So it is very possible to be for a ban on semi-automatic weapons, if you believe they fall under that category, and still be pro the Second Amendment. And I think that in general, the way we talk about this issue is not productive. It does not discuss the various complexities of the legislation. You'll notice that the question that just brought up this entire conversation or debate was stating if anyone at the panel supported gun control other than the students. I don't have a transcript of what we said, but I know that I never used the words gun control because they're not useful. They just blanket in every policy that's available to us under one simple frame that you can use to scare people. Gun control. It's a lot scarier than saying that you're going to allow background checks for private sales of arms, or if you're going to, ban semi-automatic weapons. We know this issue, and we've thought a lot about it. And I think another problem with the way we talk about it is we don't understand the other side. We're just talking past each other. This is what we've done for 19 years. And you have to understand why people own semi-automatic weapons. It's because, they can be used for hunting rifles. And, it's a culture. It gives people pride. But, the argument that I would use is that even that pride is just, it's costs and benefits, and it's not worth it. If there are people who are losing their lives because of it, it sucks that a tiny group of, manic individuals or, individuals who perpetuate these crimes do that and ruin it for all the legal, law-abiding citizens who own these weapons. But I think it's a reasonable sacrifice to make.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
We're talking about banning assault rifles. All rifles, not just assault rifles, claimed 252 American lives last year. What about the 2 million lives that guns saved by stopping violent crimes?
It's very difficult.
What do we do with those 2 million people? Do we allow them to be raped and murdered?
It's very difficult to prove that a gun saved.
No, those are the documented ones. Those are the ones that
committed.
reported an armed civilian or a police officer.
But this is what I'm talking
shot.
about. It's not a productive conversation.
Well, why isn't it? I'm willing to have a gun control debate, but we gotta be talking about the same rules. We're talking about 30,000 deaths a year, right? You get rid of the suicide rates, now we're down to 10,000, because there's 20,000. 10,000, how many of them are shot by armed civilians defending themselves or law enforcement? I'm gonna say at least half of them. So now we're talking about 5,000 gun deaths a year. Compare that to the 250,000 that doctors kill every year. How about if every time a kid got hit by a bicycle, we ran it on media over and over, and that's all we talked about for months and months at a time. Guns are safe, they're a non-issue. We shouldn't even be having this discussion. If you guys really cared about human lives, you would be asking for the same restrictions and bans that we have on vehicles or on guns for cars. Cars kill many more. How come we don't have the same restrictions on vehicles? How many people, drunk drivers? Let's do a comparison.
Vehicles?
Let's have the same restrictions. If you've been convicted of a violent crime, it should be the same. Cars are much more deadly.
All right, I think we have come to an end. I have an idea to close with. I think everyone here who talked to someone or talked to someone, if you're someone who's against guns, find the gun owner in your life or on your social media channel. Engage them and start having that conversation. Maybe you guys can talk too, afterwards. I think if we have that conversation, then we can start getting beyond the isms and actually get towards in a way that we make some progress. And I hope that, as awkward as this last part of this has been, that this actually helps us start to move forward. And I thank you all for your, I thank the panel. I thank our panelists from coming from near and far here across our state. I thank Southern Vermont College for offering us this space. Thank you very much for that. And with that, we'll conclude. Drive safely.